People often say that strength is something you choose. But sometimes, strength chooses you. For me, it began on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was gray, and the air felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I remember standing in the kitchen, washing dishes, while the radio played softly in the background. It was an ordinary day, so ordinary that I never imagined it would change my life. Then my phone rang. At first, I almost ignored it. My hands were wet, and the sink was full of soap bubbles. But something inside me told me to answer. "Hello," I said. There was a short pause on the other end. Then, a voice spoke, serious and careful. Everything after that moment felt blurry. Words floated through the air like pieces of a broken mirror. Hospital, emergency. You need to come now. My heart began to pound so hard that I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my jacket and left the house without even drying my hands. The drive to the hospital felt endless. The road lights passed by like silent witnesses, and every second felt heavier than the last. I kept telling myself it would be okay. It had to be okay. But when I arrived, the look on the doctor's face told me the truth before he even spoke. Life had just changed. In one moment, everything I knew, thus, safety, the plans, the simple rhythm of daily life, collapsed like a house of cards. I sat in a cold hospital chair, staring at the white floor tiles. People walked past me, nurses whispered to each other, machines beeped somewhere far away, yet the world inside my chest felt completely silent. That was the first moment I realized something important. No one was coming to save me. The responsibilities, the decisions, the weight of everything ahead was all suddenly mine. I wanted to cry. I wanted to run away. I wanted someone to tell me that I didn't have to be strong. But life didn't give me that option. Because sometimes strength isn't about courage or bravery. Sometimes strength is simply what happens when you realize that if you don't stand up, everything will fall apart. And that day, sitting in that hospital hallway, I understood something I had never understood before. I was about to become strong, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. The hospital hallway felt colder as the night grew longer. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the same spot on the floor. People passed by, their footsteps echoing softly, but everything around me seemed distant. It was like I was watching the world through a thick glass wall. Finally, a nurse called my name. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling weak, and followed her down a quiet corridor. The lights were bright, almost too bright, and the smell of medicine filled the air. When I entered the room, my heart tightened. The person lying in the hospital bed looked so small, so fragile. Machines surrounded the bed, quietly beeping as they monitored every breath. Just yesterday, everything had been normal. Just yesterday, we were laughing about something small and meaningless. Now, everything felt different. I walked closer and gently held their hand. It felt warm, but weak. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. A doctor came in and explained the situation carefully. There would be treatments. There would be bills. There would be decisions that needed to be made quickly. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. I nodded as if I understood everything. But the truth was, my mind was spinning. Numbers, medical terms, responsibilities, they all rushed together like a storm. Before that day, I had never thought much about these things. Life had always felt simple enough. Problems came and went, and somehow they always worked themselves out. But this was different. This wasn't a small problem that would disappear tomorrow. This was something that would change our lives for a long time. When I finally stepped outside the hospital later that night, the air felt strangely quiet. The city lights flickered in the distance, and cars passed by on the road as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything had changed. I sat in my car, holding the steering wheel tightly. For the first time, the reality of everything began to sink in. There would be hospital visits. There would be long nights. There would be moments when I felt completely lost. And yet, life would keep moving forward whether I was ready or not. Tears filled my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly, because deep down, I knew something important. From this moment on, people would depend on me. And when people depend on you, you don't always get the luxury of breaking down. So I took a deep breath, started the car, and drove into the night. Not because I felt strong, but because I had no other choice. The days that followed felt like a blur. Every morning started earlier than the last. I would wake up before the sun, the quiet darkness of the room reminding me of the long day ahead. For a few seconds, I sometimes forgot everything that had happened. Then reality would return. The hospital visits, the paperwork, the phone calls, the endless decisions. Life had suddenly become a series of responsibilities. I learned the routine quickly. Wake up, go to the hospital, talk to doctors, listen carefully, ask questions I never thought I would have to ask. After that, I would rush to handle other parts of life that refused to pause. Bills, work, errands. Everything needed attention. Everything needed me. At first, it felt overwhelming. There were moments when I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. My mind would wander, thinking about the life I had just weeks ago. Back then, I worried about small things. Being late for work, forgetting to reply to a message, running out of groceries. Now those things seemed so unimportant. Life had forced me to grow in ways I never expected. But the hardest part wasn't the long hours or the stress. The hardest part was pretending to be strong for everyone else. Family members would call and ask, "How is everything?" Friends would send messages, hoping for good news. When they spoke to me, they expected reassurance. They wanted to hear hope in my voice, so I gave it to them. "I think things will get better," I would say. "We just need time." Even when I wasn't sure if those words were true. Late at night, when everything was quiet again, the mask would slowly fall away. I would sit alone in my room, the silence surrounding me like a heavy blanket. That was when the fear appeared. What if things never go back to normal? What if I'm not strong enough? What if everything falls apart? But every time those thoughts appeared, something inside me answered back. You don't have time to fall apart. Tomorrow is waiting. So each morning, I stood up again. I walked into the hospital again. I faced the uncertainty again. Not because I was fearless. Not because I was confident, but because when life puts a storm in front of you, sometimes the only way forward is to walk straight through it. And little by little, without realizing it, I was learning something important. Strength doesn't come from feeling powerful. Sometimes, strength comes from simply refusing to stop walking. Weeks slowly turned into months. At some point, the hospital began to feel strangely familiar. I knew the sound of the elevators, the smell of the hallways, and even the nurses who worked the night shifts. What once felt frightening had quietly become part of my everyday life. But even the strongest routine cannot hide exhaustion forever. One evening, after another long day at the hospital, I walked outside and sat on a bench near the parking lot. The sun had already disappeared, leaving the sky dark and silent. For the first time in a long while, I didn't rush to go anywhere. I just sat there. My body felt heavy, as if every step I had taken over the past months had suddenly caught up with me. My mind was tired from thinking, deciding, worrying. I had spent so long being strong for everyone else, that I had forgotten something important. I was tired too. Cars passed by slowly on the road, their headlights cutting through the darkness. People walked in and out of the hospital doors, each carrying their own worries and struggles. For a moment, I watched them quietly. And then something unexpected happened. Tears began to fall. Not loud, dramatic crying, just silent tears that I couldn't stop. They slipped down my face as if all the emotions I had pushed away were finally asking to be seen. The fear, the exhaustion, the loneliness. For months, I had carried everything without letting myself break. I told myself there was no time for weakness, no room for falling apart. But sitting on that bench, I realized something. Even the strongest people have moments when the weight becomes too much. And maybe that's not weakness. Maybe it's simply being human. I covered my face with my hands and allowed myself to cry for a few minutes. No one noticed. And honestly, I didn't care if they did. Because in that quiet moment, I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't the strong one holding everything together. I was just someone who had been trying their best. Eventually, the tears stopped. The night air felt cool against my face as I took a slow, deep breath. My heart was still heavy, but something inside me felt a little lighter. Not because the problems had disappeared, but because I finally admitted that carrying everything alone was hard. I stood up from the bench and looked back at the hospital building glowing under the lights. Tomorrow would still come. The responsibilities would still be there. But somehow, after allowing myself that small moment of honesty, I felt ready to walk back inside. Because strength isn't about never breaking. Sometimes strength is simply about standing up again. Even after you do. Time has a quiet way of changing everything. At first, every day felt like a battle I wasn't sure I could win. Each morning brought new worries, new responsibilities, and new moments of uncertainty. I used to count the days, hoping things would somehow become easier. But slowly, without realizing it, something inside me began to change. The hospital visits became less frightening. The difficult conversations became easier to face. Even the long nights filled with worry started to feel a little less overwhelming. Not because life had suddenly become perfect, but because I had learned how to carry the weight. One afternoon, while sitting beside the hospital bed, I noticed something surprising. The person I loved smiled at me, small, tired, but real. It wasn't a big moment. No dramatic words were spoken. But in that quiet smile, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For so long, I had been focused on surviving each day, that I hadn't stopped to notice how far we had come. The road had been painful, uncertain, and exhausting. Yet we were still here, still fighting, still moving forward. I realized then that strength doesn't arrive all at once. It grows slowly, in the background of your life, while you're busy doing what needs to be done. Every difficult decision, every sleepless night, every moment when you felt like giving up but didn't, those moments quietly build the kind of strength you never planned to have. Looking back now, I barely recognize the person I was before all of this happened. Back then, I thought strength meant never feeling afraid. Now I know the truth. Strength is continuing even when you are afraid. Strength is showing up even when you are exhausted. Strength is holding on even when the future feels uncertain. And most importantly, strength is choosing to care for the people you love, even when it costs you everything. Life didn't ask me if I was ready. It didn't give me time to prepare. It simply placed a storm in front of me and waited to see what I would do. I walked through it, not perfectly, not without tears, but step by step, day by day, I kept moving. And somewhere along the way, I discovered something I never expected. I was stronger than I ever believed. Not because I wanted to be, but because I had no choice.